hello there. Good morning. Good to have you today. Thank you guys so much for joining us on the Influence here at the Revival Center YouTube page, YouTube channel. Thank you guys every week for tuning in or for listening this to archive later on. I have many people who come up and talk about how they enjoy the different episodes and different topics that we talk about. So thank you guys very much for that. I'm joined here with my wife, Amanda. Amanda, it's good to have you today again.
Good morning.
You survived last episode and you're back.
Yeah, I guess I survived. So every time I survive, I'll be back.
And obviously, if you're watching this live, you can jump into the chat section there of our YouTube page. And we got Aaron Limbaugh, who is behind the camera there. And he would be glad to say hello to you, and we can interact with each other. And obviously, like the video real quick, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you don't mind. We have many people who watch this and interact with all of our social media handles, and nobody subscribes. And so the subscriptions helps us get the influence out there further. So we would be very thankful if you make that happen. With that being said, we're in a teaching series right now that actually comes from our fellowship, the Assemblies of God. They put together different position papers, different teachings on very hard subjects. And so what we wanted to do in this particular teaching series is begin to teach from some of the biblical perspectives of marriage, but mainly from the perspective of divorce. What does the Bible actually say about divorce and remarriage? Because it's a very hard topic. Last week, Amanda and myself, we spoke about how we have interacted with divorce within our family structure and how it has impacted our life in various ways. And I believe most people have been touched by divorce in some shape, form, or fashion. So today we're going to pick up with new material. But by a quick review, if you did not see the last episode, I certainly would encourage you to go watch that because it's all balanced. If you listen to any one of these episodes without the context of all of them, they're going to be out of balance because we do not cover every aspect of marriage and divorce in one sitting. It is meant to be piecemeal together, so you really need to look at all of it to get a well-balanced viewpoint because you can misrepresent the things that we're saying because they are out of balance. So with that being said, we ended last week talking about the biblical teaching of marriage. We talked about how marriage is the foundation of the family, both in terms of producing children, but also in terms of raising those children, also in terms of how the Bible uses the context of marriage of a husband and wife to teach the biblical idea of Jesus and the church. So there's a lot of richness there that we covered last week. But this week we're going to do the new material, which is the nature of divorce. The nature of divorce. We're going to look at it from a biblical perspective. It is somewhat controversial at times, and it has caused a lot of confusion. It has caused a lot of debate and a lot of, quite frankly, hurt feelings whenever it comes to the issue of divorce in the church and those that we have relationship with. So we're going to get into it. We're going to get deep into it right here. So hang out with us all the way to the end. And hopefully, as we deal with each of these different segments of the nature of divorce, it will begin to paint a more balanced picture. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, well, let's get into it. So we're going to start with the biggie. We're going to start with Malachi chapter 2, verse 14 and 16. We all know what it says. I'm going to tell you what it says, and then we'll deal with it. But basically, God hates divorce. God's attitude towards divorce is nowhere stated more clearly than in Malachi chapter 2, verse 14 through 16. This is what he says. The Lord is acting as the witness between you and the wife of your youth because you have broken faith with her, though she is your partner, the wife of your marriage covenant. Has not the Lord made them one? In flesh and spirit they are His. And why one? Because He was seeking godly offspring. So guard yourself in your spirit and do not break faith with the wife of your youth. I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel, And I hate a man's covering himself with violence as well as with his garments, says the Lord Almighty. So guard yourself in your spirit and do not break faith. This passage shows that divorce is treachery against one's companion. The terminology that God uses here is very strong terminology. And whenever I read something in the Bible and it's this strong and it makes you feel uncomfortable to read it, especially in the context of our culture, and 50% of the people have been divorced, and then you read this in the Bible, a lot of times people will try to explain things away. And my stance is this right here. It says what it says. And that's kind of where I go back to. I didn't write the Bible. I follow God. He's God. I'm not. It says what it says. This is how He feels about divorce. We're going to get into some of the reasons people get divorced, which, again, the Bible allows certain aspects of divorce. But in terms of the pure heartbeat of God, is His desire, His will, is that we're faithful to each other, we love each other, we're respectful to each other, and we stay married until death do us part. That is God's perfect plan for our lives. But in this context of what He is referring to in this passage, it describes divorce as almost violent. It describes it almost like a tearing apart of flesh. And really it is. Broken homes are most detrimental, in my opinion, to children. Oftentimes children who come from broken homes have so many confusion ideas. Was it my fault? Why is this happening? Why this or why that? And Amanda, won't you just share something personal right here in terms of when you were going through all of these divorces as a child, watching your mom get married or get divorced, and just the whole concept as a 5-year-old, as a 10-year-old, how did you comprehend those things that you were going through?
Well, I'm going to leave you with a little bit of hope after I say this. But yes, my mom was married and has been divorced 6 times. She's currently single. Her first marriage, I was not alive yet. I was not. It was her marriage right out of high school, which you can guess why that ended. It was right out of high school, and he was in the Army. And the second marriage, I was not born yet. But the third marriage was my father. He left when I was a year old, so I really didn't know what was going on. I had visitation with him. That was normal for me. I would go to his house for my birthday or Easter or Christmas, special occasions or whatever, and I loved my dad. I didn't think anything different. That's all I knew. So, children that don't know any different, as long as they have a relationship with their father, no matter, if it's distant, whatever, I think that's better than nothing, honestly. And then some can't help it, and so... But then the fourth marriage and the fifth marriage and the sixth marriage, that all changed me. So I was old enough to know at 11, or her fourth marriage was my brother's dad. Of course, that brought a brother. I was 7 at the time, so I was older. I knew what was going on. Had a little bit of jealousy issue, and then he had a dad, I didn't. That kind of thing. That was different. That caused a little bit of animosity in my heart as a child that I didn't understand. But then I got a little older at 11. Well, she divorced him. He was a con artist. And then she married again, and that's what brought us to Alabama. There was a lot of, I'm not going to go into details. I'll spare them the details. But he was in jail when I met him, so we visited him in prison. And then that was in Florida. That's where they met. But then he was from Alabama, though. So we moved to Alabama after they married. Then I inherited 2 stepsisters, very close to my age. And so I left all my friends, left everything I knew, my grandparents, on my mom's side, my dad, what little I did get to see. I remember a last meeting with him, and he had a new baby with another woman that I had just met. And it was all just so much. There's a lot of details I'll spare you about. But you would think I'd just be a wreck, a mess after all this and just grow up to be just crazy. But maybe I did a little bit, I don't know. But I feel like the Lord also at the same time protected my brain, protected my heart, protected my emotions, because He had a plan for my life, just like He has a plan for everybody's life, every child's life. He has a plan. And so despite my mother's actions, despite my father's actions, despite everybody's actions around me, when I found God, or actually God found me, but when I accepted Him in my heart, that's when everything changed. And the healing began to change my heart, and to view my mother as a person that, hey, she deserves love too. And she was just searching. Hey, my dad, he was young. He didn't know what he was doing. Not making excuses, but being able to forgive and see them as people and see the spirit behind things. And just be able to forgive and accept the way things were is what made me into the person I am today. So kids that have gone through divorce, that's not the last straw for them. That could be the beginning. That could be what boosts their character and what helps them be able to minister to others, because it has right now. I mean, I'm sharing my story. I hope that it's ministering to somebody. And so it's kind of built me into the person I am today. And so, and even without divorce, children see things, and their grandparents or other things. They go through things. Children are resilient. We don't give them enough credit, honestly. But at the same time, we do want to protect them from a split home, because God does desire for the family as a whole to have a mother and a father. That is the best plan. But if this world, God gives you different cards like it did me, that's not the end of the world. God can still restore and heal and make you into a better person for it.
And if you didn't know her story and all you knew was our story, and we're going to celebrate how many years in April?
25. I got it right today.
Very good. We're going to celebrate 25 years in April. If you only knew that we've been married for 25 years, that's all you knew, then you would assume that she would have come from a one mom, one father household that has also been married for 25, or 50 years. Yeah. But the fact that she didn't come from that, but yet here we are, going into celebrating 25 years of marriage, shows you what Jesus Christ can do. And it shows you how powerful the gospel is in someone's life, and that our children were not raised anything like the way she was raised. Our children have never known another father except me. They have never known another mother except their mother. And they have no concept of what she experienced. And that's only a result of the gospel. And that's what she's referring to. Even though divorce is very, very hard and it's very devastating, and it is a ripping apart in emotions and everything that you are put through, the power of the gospel and the power of God's grace and mercy can absolutely trump anything that the devil does, anything. Yeah. Going back to the teaching, even though divorce happens and things do take place in our lives, it doesn't change the fact of God's desire and God's will. And just because you teach God's desire and God's will doesn't mean that is judgmental. It just means this is the standard. And the standard never ceases to be the standard, irregardless of our experiences that we live this life out with. So as noted in Malachi, Jesus also says in Matthew chapter 19, verse number 6, "Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate." That is still God's plan, regardless of our experiences in this world. Divorce was not a part of God's original intention for humanity. Just like death was not His original intention for humanity. Just like murder was not God's original intention for humanity. Divorce is a result of the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden. That is the result of it. The devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That is his chief aim. And if our relationship is like a gospel illustration of Jesus and the church, then absolutely the devil is going to try to destroy this institution of marriage. So the divine purpose can only be realized as the husband and wife subject themselves to Christ and to each other, as described in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 21 through 31. That's the only way this thing is going to work, is if I am a believer in Jesus, if she is a believer in Jesus, and we serve God together, and when we do it that way, then we will be good with each other here. So God's hatred for divorce is not to be interpreted as condemnation for those who themselves are not at fault, but have been divorced and victimized by the ungodly actions of a spouse. The divorce laws and the teachings of the Old Testament were designated to add a measure of protection for the innocent, not to heap guilt upon the victims of circumstances over which they had little or no control over. So the whole idea of divorcing your spouse was to protect the innocent party. So if the man was cheating on the wife, then there was grounds for divorce because that divorce would protect that wife or vice versa. It wasn't to heap guilt on the innocent spouse who hadn't done nothing wrong. And so changing your mindset to understand that what God allowed to happen in terms of divorce was to protect the innocent party, not to condemn the innocent party. Let's keep going. Number 2, the law regulated divorce. So in the Old Testament, the law recognized the fact that divorce was already taking place in Israel, as were many other sinful practices common to that ancient world. In those times, women were under the authority of the husband and without legal recourse of their own might be abandoned to starvation or even prostitution on a mere whim. It could happen that fast. In giving Israel the law, God met His people where they were at in this pagan region, put restrictions on their sinful practices, protected the weak and the innocent, and attempted to direct them in ways loving and just. The Old Testament divorce law was a necessary hedge against human sinfulness that already exists within the depravity of the human heart. The law provided that while the husband was the only one who could initiate divorce, he could do so only under careful prescribed circumstances. And there are many references in the Old Testament that describe this. Now, the regulative nature of the law is seen in the confrontation between Jesus and the Pharisees, who erred in saying Moses commanded that a man give a certificate of divorce to his wife, thus freeing him to send her away. Again, this is found in Matthew chapter 19, verses 1 through 9. But Jesus pointed out that Moses only permitted them to divorce their wives, but even then, not for every cause, as was commonly practiced at that time. Jesus accurately read the divorce provisions that was written in Deuteronomy chapter 24, where the Hebrew is a simple sequence that does not command divorce, but simply recognizes that it happens under certain circumstances. Friend, you are not allowed to divorce your spouse because they refuse to brush their teeth. That's not grounds for divorce. There are specific reasons why divorce happens, but it's not for every reason under the moon. Won't you pick up there, Amanda?
Yeah. So number 3 is Jesus forbade divorce as contrary to God's will and word. He made this clear in Matthew 19, 5 and 6, and Mark 10, 6 through 9. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. The partner or partners responsible for breaking the marriage covenant is guilty of adultery, and you can see Mark 10 and 11 for that. Paul forbade Christian couples to divorce. He says, "To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord." Paul had actual saying of Jesus to back this up. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife, and that's in 1 Corinthians 7, 10, 11. Paul recognized that some Christians were getting divorces, but apparently for invalid reasons. Therefore, he commanded in these cases that they keep the way open for reconciliation. And anyone who... And number 5 is Paul forbade Christians to take the initiative in divorce simply because their partner was an unbeliever. It appears that some new converts were eager to do exactly that, just leave their spouse because they converted, but their spouse didn't believe yet. Yeah. And then Paul said, "To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord." So Paul was speaking under his own under the inspiration of the Spirit, not stuff Jesus said at this point. He merely refers to the fact that he has no actual saying of Jesus on this subject. He says, if any brother has a wife who is not a believer, and she is willing to live with him as a faithful wife, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer, and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. But if the unbeliever leaves, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound or enslaved in such circumstances. And that's 1 Corinthians 7:12 through 15. So basically, he's saying, stay together. If nothing else is happening except that you believe now and they don't divorce, because you never know. It's in hopes that the other spouse will get saved. Because we know people in this church that have prayed for their spouse, come to the altar for 10 years, and finally something clicked, and they just decided to come for whether it would be a kid's Christmas play. One was a Donuts for Dad at the school, and a preacher was ministering, and they got saved there. And so you just never know when that moment will happen. And we can't always go off of the actions of a spouse, because many times some spouses, particularly I've seen this in men, they cover their questioning. They're starting to really see things, and they're starting to really question things, and they're starting to believe. But they cover it with anger because they let the pride get the best of them. They don't want their spouse to see them getting soft, so to speak. And that's a crazy example, but it's true. We've seen it time and time again. But one day, just keep praying, keep believing for your spouse, and they may get saved. You never know. That's our hope, that everyone gets saved. So why not your spouse? Why not your child? And so, so I believe that's why if they're not doing anything unbiblical, but they're just living and not believing, and maybe they got a bad attitude, you got that stuff that you can communicate with them, and at least win them over with love and an example.
So kind of what Amanda was teaching there is often referred to as the Pauline exceptions. So to kind of do a rundown of divorce, one is adultery. So obviously that's pretty cut and dry. But then some of the other examples that is giving there, the Pauline exceptions would be abandonment, it would be abuse in terms of your safety. So like verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, any kind of abuse. Children abuse, things like that. And remember how Paul explains husband and wives, that does a man beat himself? If a man beats his wife, it's like beating himself, because you're one flesh. So if I don't beat myself and hit myself in the face, then why would I ever put my hands on her? If I don't do that to myself, why would I do that to her? Or vice versa, if she beat me, would she be beating herself?
Yeah, pretty much.
And so nobody has to live in that. That is grounds for divorce, because that vow has been broken on how you treat each other with love and with respect and with honor. So these are some of the Pauline exceptions. The idea that Scripture is referring to here is that you just can't divorce because, you know what, I just don't like this sweater you're wearing today. That sweater just gets on my nerves. I can't believe you're still wearing it. You ain't doing nothing I say. I'm leaving.
Get over it.
And so that is what was happening back then, and I'm afraid that in some circles it happens today too.
I think that boils down, and we may be touching on it later, but I think that boils down to communication. Don't just harbor resentment and not communicate your likes or your dislikes to your spouse, because you never know what they might receive. Whether you can't just assume things either. Assumption doesn't work in cases where you might think, oh, well, they're not going to listen to me. They don't care what I say. Now there's, extenuating circumstances always with anything, but if the spouse will hear you out and you can at least sit down, you say over a cup of coffee, I say over a slice of pizza, and talk about it, communicate, because you never know what your spouse or even yourself is willing to change. And two, it might be, you might need to look in the mirror sometimes.
Absolutely. That's usually the first place to look.
Right.
Let's keep going. Number 6 here. Jesus permitted a Christian to initiate divorce when marital unfaithfulness was involved. He says this in Matthew 5. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. Now, the Greek word translated here, marital unfaithfulness, uses a certain kind of Greek word, and I am not trying to pronounce that word. If you want to try to pronounce it there, Amanda.
Porneia.
Porneia, very, very good, very good. I think that's exactly how you pronounce it.
It's a guess.
So, but what is interesting about this verb, porneia, is that it's not just dealing with the act of adultery. What is interesting is that it is a broad term used for all kinds of sexual immorality. So it's not just a narrow divine focus. In fact, you see this same Greek word all throughout the Bible, 1 Corinthians 5, verse 1, Galatians 5:19, I mean, all over. Usually whenever you read where Paul talks about sexual immorality, that's the same word that Jesus was using. So the reason that is important to understand is that whenever you're dealing with, let's say, pornography, that is an act of adultery. Because if a man look lustfully upon a woman in his heart, it's as if he has committed adultery. And so what is plaguing our society, and I don't even know if I'm doing a good job of it as pastoring, to be honest. It's a very difficult subject. I do throw it in there sometimes about you can't have a healthy marriage if pornography is in it. You know, I do say things like that, but I don't know if we understand the depth of destruction that we're doing to our own lives and to our marriage when pornography is involved, because it is literally the same word that Jesus used and that Paul used, which is grounds for a divorce.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Friend, it is grounds for a divorce, biblically speaking. You have went outside of the bounds of that marriage. And I don't know if we understand the magnitude of what that means. So Jesus spoke of the man's initiative in divorcing an immoral partner. In Jewish society, normally only the man had the legal right, though upper-class women, as Herodias seemed to have done so in Matthew 14, verse 3. Clearly, the spiritual principle applies for either men or women. Moreover, it should be noted that Jesus granted permission to divorce only under certain circumstances where this, say that Greek word again, porneia, was involved, the sexual immorality. He did not, however, issue a command to divorce, since such action would rule out any possibility of reconciliation. In other words, it is, I still believe, even though if sexual immorality has come inside of that family, inside of that marriage, and you do have the right to divorce if you want, I do believe that the heart of God would be to try to work through that and to try to reconcile that. But I will be honest with you, that's the preacher version of me. That's what Jesus says, and I have to tell you what He said. And we do have to abide by it to the best of our ability. But just being honest, you know, that is a decision that when adultery is entered into a marriage unit, that is a very personal decision. And I would never, ever tell somebody what to do. I have seen people survive that. I have seen others not survive that. And I don't celebrate or throw stones or anything, judgment, anything at all, because that is such a very, very hard, emotional decision. And if you do choose to try to work it out, friend, that is not going to be easy. You're going to need the grace of God to forgive in such a way that you do not allow that to linger in that marriage years down the road. I mean, you really have to put that under the blood.
Well, and also, a lot of times we forget the fact that if a couple decides to divorce because of unfaithfulness, then we still want the restoration of the person. Mm-hmm. So the wife still needs restoration, whether she was the one cheating or the one that was, the victim, so to speak. the husband still needs restoration if he was the one cheated on, or if he's the victim. Or if he's the cheater. And so, it's such a trashy word, but anyways, the one being unfaithful. They both need restoration, biblical restoration as people, as we desire for the one that committed the sinful act to be saved, no matter what the act was. And so that is, I think, grounds for divorce or not, we want restoration of the person's heart, their soul. We still desire them to go to heaven and serve Jesus and come to church and be fed and have relationships. We shouldn't just isolate them. And so that's ultimately the goal.
It is. And as a man, I am sympathetic to all of the temptations that are pushed upon us as men. And when someone does fall in this area, I do have a lot of compassion in my heart, because I do recognize how we're made as men and how the devil puts things in front of us to tempt us and to lure us in those directions. I'm sympathetic to it. And so I'm glad Psalms 51 is in the Bible. Psalms 51 is basically the repentful prayer of an adulterous and murderer David, King David, as he cried out for mercy upon God, and God granted that mercy to him. So going to your point, Amanda, we do desire for, if someone does fall in some sin such as this, that they are restored, regardless of what happens with the marriage, that they're restored because God loves them, God can forgive them, and God can still give them a purpose for their life, regardless of what happens in our past. And we have walked that out with many people behind the scenes that nobody knows about. And we'll probably do that the rest of our life in ministry, because I believe in people, and I believe in the power and the mercy and the grace of God. So it's a very heavy subject, guys, but yet I hope that you feel the hope that we have in it. So let me close it up right here with this particular section. It is seldom, if ever, that any single passage gives all aspects of truth on any single theme. To come to an understanding of any truth, we must take the whole of what the Bible teaches, and that is the intent of this teaching. So again, don't look at any one of these episodes by itself. You got to look at it in the totality of everything that we're saying. So thank you, Amanda, for helping us teach this thing. You make me look a lot better sitting here in front of this camera.
Even though he doesn't like my sweater.
No, I was joking.
I know.
So with all that being said, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Like it, subscribe to the channel. Hit us up next week as we continue this subject. God bless.